Hello everyone, welcome in, Stock for Water and Yak. How are you guys doing tonight? Hope everybody's week is off to a pretty good start. Mine's been okay. Work was, modestly busy, but productive today. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. As promised, we're finally starting a new audiobook stream, and as a reminder, these streams tend to be shorter, like an hour, because I feel like if I push myself to go too long, the quality of the reading decreases. Yeah, I'm sure that even professional audiobook readers need to take breaks. They probably take more frequent breaks than I do. But who knows? I'm not a professional. That's why they only do public domain books that I think I can get away with, because there's no legal reason I wouldn't be able to. But thank you to everybody who came out to my last couple of streams. Yesterday we finished Nancy Drew's Secrets Can Kill original CD-ROM release, and then began Carol Reed 2, Hope Springs Eternal. And on Saturday we continued the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc 2021. Not a professional yet. Yeah, thank you, Yak. We'll work on that in my spare time, because I have so much spare time. No, Yak, I don't want to say it on the VOD and spoil it for other people who might play the game, but are on this stream. But you can go back and check the VOD. It was a pretty abrupt ending, and I can say with 100% absolute certainty that the killer was not who you thought it was. In fact, if you hadn't played the game before, it would be pretty much physically impossible for you to know who the killer was. And I'm not saying it was Aunt Eloise, because it wasn't. Really. Yeah, that was not a bad game. I feel like I like some of the changes they did for the later Nancy Drew games, and it was cool, some of the little ciphers they had to give you hints, but it was the ending felt a bit abrupt. Hey, Great White Knoll, how are you doing? The killer was me? Why, I had no idea. Nobody tells me anything. I'd like to know how Her Interactive got the rights to use me in a game when I was so young. Yeah, my parents probably signed my rights over. They're probably AI likenesses of me now. Thanks, Nancy Drew. But, yeah, going from 2 mystery games in one stream to 1 mystery book in one stream. I believe this is a mystery we'll be tackling tonight. Hey, Captain Thaco, how are you doing? Yet the real killer was the friends we made along the way. And we did make some friends, and some enemies, but this is to be expected when you're a pushy girl, as the football star called Nancy Drew. Manners, though. The brigands did it. Well, we do like to work together on major projects that improve the school, and I'm not saying that murdering anybody would improve the school. That would be dark, and we all know that Nancy Drew games are not too dark. No, these are suitable for children here. I always seem to have slight congestion or allergies, have for years, but it always seems to get more acute when I decide to do an audiobook stream. Fate? It's all in my head? Or is it possible that sticking my nose in 100-year-old books has an adverse effect on my sinuses? I don't know. Smells nice, though. Right, anything to defeat the manatees. Yak, indeed. You can't trust those manatees. They walk among us. And hey, Matt Glad, welcome in. Oh, God. Matt Glad is referring to the unfortunate incident in which somebody redeemed the highest value ASMR, and it polarized viewers and got turned into a sea shanty. Oh, God. I should probably edit all this out of the VOD before I put it up on YouTube. Well, yeah. I'll remove all this before I turn this into an audio file on LibriVox. Well, I say I'm going to do that, but this is the 4th book I've read on stream, and I haven't done into any of the others. I really should do Benighted, because it only came into the public domain after I finished reading it. In the United States, I go by them British dates, and I better put that up before somebody else does. Be like, first, and everyone will be like, who the hell are you? Because LibriVox forum users talk like that undead witch from Army of Darkness. One assumes. Yes, it was quite something, Yak. I don't know if people are going to want these high level ASMR redeems to become more regular or not. I turned off all the channel points rewards today. Oh yeah, and you guys should check out Matt Glatt. So the book we're going to be reading is CRATER'S GOLD by Philip Curtis, and I don't know anything about it. I just saw it randomly on eBay for a cheap price and figured I would see what it was like. Some company is reprinting public domain novels and selling them on Amazon, but it has no reviews, and they don't really have a description. They just have a 1-paragraph excerpt from it. And I found a review of it from the 1920s that said, yeah, this is a pretty good mystery, or a pretty good novel, so yeah, worth checking out, worth preserving in audiobook form. And if it sucks, we can stop reading after a couple streams, or I can finish it anyway, because reasons. Hey, I mean, I finished games that weren't necessarily always excellent on stream, like that sniper game. Oh wait, I didn't finish that. Or on Escape. Yes, on Escape. You had, what is that, Yak? You said had a public domain story. Yeah, I'd be open to people potentially requesting public domain stories to turn into audiobooks. I hadn't thought of it before, because it was, I don't do these streams all that frequently. That's why we're not likely to get through more than 2 books a year. But I also never know how many people want to do it. Or how many people watch these things. They're not among my most watched VODs on YouTube, but then my VODs on YouTube aren't watched particularly much. Fellow book nerd. Yes, we love books around here. So this is the book we'll be reading. It's not a first edition, I think, because it was published by someone else. What is it? It doesn't list the edition, but 1919, and it was published by A.L. Burt Company by arrangement with Harper and Brothers. That's the same Harper that eventually joined up with Collins. And this book originally belonged to Chaz Howard of Glen Rock, Pennsylvania. And here's some sticker that says originally sold for, or at some point sold for, is that $35? $75? I can't bloody tell. Bootsy Collins? Was that Harper's nickname, Matt Glad? Or is that the one who Harper joined with? Yeah, I love inscriptions in books. I try to inscribe books that I give away these days. Or always. Decreasing the value be damned. Oh yeah, I love used bookstores. Yeah, same here. Amazing things you find in secondhand books. The stories, the places they've been through. Oh, that's a different Collins. Yeah, I can't. I think there's one in Pride and Prejudice, too. I think there's one in an old Gothic soap from the 60s, too. Because I occasionally watch those things, or something. Anyway, here's the dust jacket. I took it off so that it would not get roughed up, because I'll probably give the book to my mom after I finish reading it. in pretty good condition for being from 1919, you know. Good old Chaz keeps his books in decent shape. Yeah, Dark Shadows. I only watched like most of the first season. My father said that they introduced a new popular character after the first season or so, and then it changed a bunch. But it was good stuff. Yeah, settle in for a story, but it won't be too long. I'm going to try and get through 4 chapters. I feel like 40 pages is a good length for a stream. And I wish the print were slightly bigger, but it's, you know, the paper's not too yellowed and it's doable. And as a reminder, when we do audiobook streams here, I don't respond. I have speech chat turned off, and I don't really respond to chat until the end when I catch up. And we have raids disabled and alerts disabled. Just mostly to make it so I can keep continuously reading, and it'll make it easier to someday turn these into actual audiobooks, which I say I'm going to do. Or I'll just get rich and pay somebody else to do it. Yeah, hire assistants. Oh, you listen to 4-hour stuff regularly. Yeah, I think we'll try and keep it to an hour, because also it's late. And there's more work to do. Always. Always. CRATER'S GOLD by Philip Curtis. Chapter 1. Styles sat in his study, smoking his breakfast pipe, and pondered the merits of being rich. For this train of thought, his setting was rather enchanting, as there was not a thing in the room which was not disreputable, not even his coat. There were holes in the carpet, the wallpaper sagged in strips, while the chair in which he was sitting was a chair, but that was about as far as one felt like going. Yes, curiously, Styles really was rich. He had been for just 3 weeks, and those 3 weeks had been wholly devoted to seeing how near a human being could come to complete inertia. Theoretically, Styles wanted nothing to happen. Ever. For 15 years of his life, things had done nothing but happen. He had made up his mind to forestall anything more in that line, but actually he was not greatly upset when his reverie was broken by the sound of steps on the gravel path, and then by louder steps on the unpainted piazza. When the visitor, instead of knocking or shouting, began to fumble around the open front door, and even went the length of ringing the disused bell, Styles was actively curious. His impulse was to answer the bell in person, but a sudden baronial whim set him back in his chair. It was the first time in his career as master of his own house that the outraged bell had ever been called upon to perform, and it struck him as happy to sit back and let his household go through the whole ritual, granted it could. The household could, but it took its time, for Mrs. Fields, the housekeeper, was deaf and antique. The indignant clamor of the bell was followed by a deep silence, a proper interval for clean apron and rolling down sleeves, for outlining future apologies for untidy states, and then the swishing sound of Mrs. Fields in action. Voices sounded in the front hall, steps on the sandy linoleum of the passageway, and then a stranger appeared at the door of the study. Behind him for a moment appeared also Mrs. Fields, with an effect of tiptoes and a look of hate. It was ironing day. The stranger took his own time about introducing himself. He was a fattish man, rather fish-like in his wonder as he looked around the room, opening and shutting his little mouth, but what he was thinking he might just as well have said out loud. He had evidently come to see a landed proprietor, probably had had a picture of one in his mind, but landed proprietors, and he has always imagined them, did not wear coats which were out at the elbows and sit in chairs with curled hair bulging out through the cushions. As to the visitor himself, he was one of those blue serge and stiff shirt in the summer men who are so ostentatiously clean as to be offensive. He did not smell of soap exactly, but one imagined he might. He was one of those men who rub their palms together continually to give the air of brisk well-being. His name, it came out, was Baumgarten, and even before he said it, Styles guessed, from his heavy, conciliatory manner, that he had something to sell. "You're a writer, ain't you, Mr. Styles?" began the visitor, and because he said it about as he would have said, "You're a schoolteacher, ain't you?" Styles replied, "No, I'm a newspaper man, or used to be." He said it with conscious defiance, for every trait in the visitor's manner was irritating, but, curiously, the announcement rather cleared the atmosphere, rather raised his standing instead of debasing it, as he had intended. Newspaper men were a known quantity. They wrote advertisements sometimes, and made money at it. If they knew the ropes, they could even aspire to be press agents, not a lucrative job in the eyes of men like Baumgarten, but still one that classed them as men of the world. "I've heard of you, Mr. Styles," announced the visitor impressively. "Charlie Elksberger has spoken about you." He paused to watch the effect of this tremendous announcement, and the statement really had made an impression on Styles. He knew that the man was lying. Styles had never known the famous Elksberger, nor had he any desire to know him, but he had to concede the fact that his visitor had chosen the name with exceeding skill. To most reporters and even writers, it would have been magic. The thing really piqued him now. What in the world this cloak-and-suit type of person, who thought of a rather flashy and boastful theatrical man as the last word in eminence, could want of a lazy recluse in a run-down house in a far country village? He would be very much disappointed if it proved to be nothing but fire insurance. The visitor did not keep him long in suspense. One could see that he could not ignore the evidence of the puffy chairs and the holes in the carpet. One could see him say to himself, "Well, I guess these so-called gentlemen need the Mazuma as badly as anyone else." Thus he had somewhat the air of one bringing glad tidings when he burst out, "Mr. Styles, do you want to sell your place?" Smug and expectant he stood there, rubbing his hands, but, to his amazement, Styles was unmoved. "No," he replied, "I don't." The visitor's jaw dropped as far as such a jaw could drop. He still looked like a fish, but like a fish startled at bumping its nose against the glass of the aquarium, and to Styles the effect was quite worth the sudden decision, for it was a sudden decision. Up to that hour, Styles had only been occupying the old house, which had formed a part of his unexpected inheritance, until somebody should come along and offer him almost anything for it. He didn't want the old wreck. He didn't want to live in the country anyway. He had 7,000 or 8,000 a year from less hampering sources. He could sit on the small of his back and dream in the twilight in a dozen places far more sociable than this. But if Baumgarten, with his fish-like mouth and his patronizing air, wanted the house, Styles would not sell it. It became invaluable to him for just that reason. For 15 years he had slaved in an atmosphere in which a large part of his business had lain in enduring insults and patronage from just such men as Baumgarten. Now, for the first time in his life, he had such a man coming to him and asking for something. He would probably never have such a chance again. "I'm sorry," he repeated with icy courtesy. "The place is not for sale." "But," gasped Baumgarten, whoever he might be and whatever he might want, "you had it listed with, what's his name, the agent? Pillars?" "Puller," corrected Styles. "Yes, I did, but I've changed my mind." The visitor looked at him shrewdly. All his mask of flattery had fallen off now. "What made you change your mind?" His tone was almost insulting, and Styles's eyes narrowed. He did not like the bullying air. It was none of Baumgarten's business why he had changed his mind. "I have learned something I didn't know when I offered the place." The remark was meant as a snub, and to a human being it would have been. All that Styles knew that he hadn't known before was that Baumgarten wanted the property, and that he didn't like Baumgarten, but the effect of the statement was startling. What have you learned?" gasped the visitor, rather disgusting in his red discomfiture. Styles almost laughed aloud at his unexpected success, but he was somewhat at a loss to know what to say next. "Oh, come," he tried at last, knowingly. "You don't suppose that I don't know when I've got a gold mine?" By the words, Styles merely meant, ironically, that he was not so simple as he might look, that he was not born yesterday. But, to his utter amazement, Baumgarten turned suddenly gouty. Styles had once seen a man of his type pulled from in front of a taxicab, and the reproduction was perfect. Then, naturally, the visitor tried to pass it off, just as Styles knew that he would. "Oh, yes, yes," he laughed, thinking that his laugh was really convincing. Then again, he did just what Styles knew that he would do, or, rather, hoped that he would do to make his type perfect. "Now come, Mr. Styles," he said, leaning forward. His method of flattery had now become that of one man of the world to another. Styles imagined that very soon he would begin tapping his knee, and in time he even did that. "Now come, Mr. Styles, just what do you want?" Styles could not resist the temptation to sit back and smile at him cynically, just for the sheer novelty of watching one of these all-wise men squirming. "I don't see how I can make it any plainer," he said, rather curtly, drawing his knee out of reach of the fat forefinger. "As for that," he went on, "what do you want of the place yourself?" So engrossed had he become in watching Baumgarten in his discomfiture that he had completely forgotten the incident of a minute past. But Baumgarten quickly recalled him. He smiled flabbily. "I guess we understand each other, Mr. Styles." After that, of course, there was nothing for Styles to answer except, "Yes, I guess we do," although, as a matter of fact, he did not understand one syllable about the whole affair, except that the visitor wanted his place, and wanted it for some reason quite apart from its value as low-grade farming land. Until he did understand, he could hardly be anything except evasive. But even at that, he was tempted. With little, estimating eyes, Baumgarten was watching him. "Tell you what you do, Mr. Styles. Give me a figure, your own figure." It was this that tempted Styles. Until 3 weeks before, he had never had a cent beyond his weekly wages, and he had reached an age when money was terribly concrete, and the lack of money still more so. The bird in hand was the only bird which had ever sung for his ears. It was a tremendous temptation to obey the command and state a figure, some impossible figure, of course. To do so might force the visitor to lay his hand on the table at once. It might even give Styles some idea of what the whole crazy business was about. But equally, as he realized, to set a figure would be to lay his own hand on the table. The size of the figure might show in an instant his own real ignorance of what his visitor was after. Suppose that it was a $10,000 matter and he said 100,000. Baumgarten would simply laugh. Suppose, on the contrary, that he said 10,000 when he might just as well have said 100,000. Suppose that he had said any preposterous sum and really got it. He would still be the loser, for he understood a man of the Baumgarten type well enough to know that whatever price he would pay for a thing would be a very small fraction of what he intended to make on it himself. Men like his cloak-and-suit visitor do not go 200 miles in the country on a hot June day to pay the market value for things. There was too much of the trader in Baumgarten not to let him see in a general way what was going on in Styles's mind. His little eyes, on the other hand, told Styles that he saw, and steeled his resolve. "No," he said suddenly, with a recall of his former stiffness. "If I don't want to sell, what is the use of setting a figure?" Baumgarten did not weaken in the least. "There's no harm in setting a figure," he insisted. He licked his lips over the favorite term and rubbed his hands. "No," replied Styles, "there's no use talking at all." To dismiss the matter, he said, "Will you have a cigar?" He brought from under the table a box of very decent domestic affairs, but even in his social manner Baumgarten ran true to type. He looked at the box without making a motion, then reached to his pocket and took out cigars with red bands. "Here, smoke one of mine," he said. "These are real Havana." Styles bridled a moment, but saw that the fellow did not mean to be rude. He merely was still possessed by the thought of bringing sunshine into a barren life. But Styles shook his head. "No, thank you. Never when I can get a pipe." The visitor looked at him in doubt. He was charmingly cloak-and-suit. There are still men who cannot believe that any man would actually smoke a pipe except as a matter of economy, yet something in Styles's independent attitude almost convinced him. He raked his experience for something to match it, for part of the pride of such men is to meet nothing new in their experience. "Englishmen smoke pipes," he said at last, proudly. His host smiled. "So they tell me." It interested him to see that the minute that he had dismissed the matter of trading, Baumgarten had dropped it too. He often wondered what a Simon Pure Broadway type would look like, away from its background. He didn't dislike the fellow half as much as he had tried to, but on a social plane Baumgarten was rather forlorn. Styles did not see any harm in asking, "How is Mr. Exberger?" His visitor's face brightened, and Styles learned at least that Baumgarten did know the dingy notable, although still incredulous that Exberger had ever spoken of him. "Fine, last I saw him," said Baumgarten. "He's a great Charlie." You're a New Yorker yourself?" suggested Styles. Baumgarten smiled in hopeless pity. "Oh, Mr. Styles, have a heart. Do I look as if I came from Duluth?" Then, responding to the ultimate pull of his soul, he added, "Ever come to the city, Mr. Styles?" For he was, of course, one of those men who could not say the shortest sentences without including the name of the person to whom he was speaking. "I lived there for 15 years, answered Styles, not because it was true, but because something about his visitor still subtly annoyed him. He added, "I hate the place." The effect was just what he had imagined that it would be. You don't say, muttered Baumgarten, too pained even to argue. Then, seeing at once where the trouble must lie, he offered more sunshine. "Better let me show you a good time the next time you're there. It all depends on knowing the ropes." He held out again his trump card. "Charlie Exberger and all that bunch. I know them all." Styles thanked him abjectly, but the conversation languished. Baumgarten rose to his feet, and, according to his code, this action in itself permitted him to reopen the matter of sales. As a delicate preliminary, he went for his pocket again. "Better take one of these. Smoke it some other time." He grandly offered 2 cigars to give Styles a choice. This time Styles took one, and Baumgarten seized the opening. "Better change your mind, Mr. Styles," he urged. "Better give me a figure." But Styles froze up. He merely grunted a laugh. "Are you going to be in town long?" Into the question he managed to squeeze a faint tone of dismissal, to imply that, no matter how long he might be in town, their paths would not cross, and at last the colossal assurance was pierced. Baumgarten flushed and turned suddenly. "I tell you what I'll do, Mr. Styles." His face had gone very much in earnest, his social manner entirely gone. Disgruntlement, anxiety, and a gambler's hope had taken its place. He took from his pocket a little red memorandum book, scratched rapidly with a silver pencil, and tore out the leaf, holding it folded around one finger. I tell you what I'll do, Mr. Styles. I'm not a man to be bluffed. On that paper is written just the figure that I'll raise the ante. He held it out tentatively, and Styles looked at him with an expression which he hoped was keeping from being puzzled. He vaguely gathered that taking the paper would form a contract. Whose ante? He did not dare to ask, but a brilliant alternative came to him. Anybody's ante? He demanded suddenly. Baumgarten rather gasped, but he was game. Anybody's ante, he agreed, so long as it's now. But it's take it or leave it. He stood gazing at Styles with a grin of increasing triumph. As no ante existed at all, so far as he knew, there was only one thing for Styles to do. But even at that, it was probably the bravest act of his life that he did not reach for that paper. Not a chance, he replied at last, in a voice that surprised himself. Baumgarten's eyes narrowed. Then you leave it? I leave it. Chapter 2. 10 minutes after Baumgarten's livery car had disappeared down the hill, Puller, the agent, came from the other direction, stalking across the fields. He was an athletic young man who tied trout flies and liked the internals of motors. Quite a bit a country gentleman. Styles saw him coming and went to the piazza rail. I was just going over to see you, he hailed. Puller stopped in his tracks. You haven't sold the place, have you? Styles, from his vantage point of the unpainted piazza, looked at him with a sudden grin. What was coming now? No, he replied to Puller's question. Not only that, but I'm thinking of taking it out of the market. Puller had a way of his own for hiding his thoughts. It consisted of taking a pipe from one pocket of his tweed jacket, a plug of black tobacco from another, a knife from another, and a box of matches from a fourth. To slice the tobacco, fill the pipe, put up the knife, and light a match kept his eyes on the ground for some time. Then, of course, conversation could be resumed between puffs and behind the match, which made his face non-committal. He had done all this and blown out a first cloud of smoke before he said anything. Going to live here? He asked, his strong, rank smoke coming over to Styles. Styles liked Puller immensely, but the new game was too tempting. Why? He asked. Have you got an offer? Puller looked down at his pipe and pressed the hot coals with his thumb. He had hard, heavy fingers that contrasted oddly with his rather fine face, and the coals did not seem to burn him. Well, not exactly, he said, but there might be a way to get the thing off your hands. What did Baumgarten offer? Asked Styles suddenly. Puller looked up in surprise, but, unlike the other caller of the afternoon, he was human first and traitor afterwards, and he broke into a hearty laugh. What do you know about Baumgarten? He asked. He left about 10 minutes before you arrived. The son of a gun! Exclaimed Puller. I agree with you, laughed Styles. After that, the matter was out in the open with a man like Puller. He puffed his pipe in a thoughtful way. What did he offer you? He asked, from lips closed around his pipe stem. Styles was about to answer him frankly as he asked, but a sudden caution suggested itself. Thus he answered, on second thought, almost anything I wanted to name. Why didn't you name $1 million? I thought of that, replied Styles soberly, and Puller looked at him with a sudden admiring appraisal. Styles joined the other man on the ground, and the two looked up at the house, the blistered piazza, the yellow clapboarded walls, the sagging green blinds, and the atrocious veneered front doors with their malarial colored panes set around central panes of ground glass. It was just such a house as country squires used to build in the 40s, to set themselves a plane above their neighbors. There was certain to be a cupola on the roof. Styles hardly knew, but there was in this case. The whole place with nearly 100 acres of land, was taxed for $4,000. It was listed at only 7 in the estate front, which Styles had inherited it. Yet now the two men looked at it with a strange and whimsical fascination. "Come in," said Styles. "Of course I told him about the gold mine," he added casually, but Puller, who had been about to insert his pipe in his teeth, drew it sharply away and looked at him with his mouth still open and one foot poised on the step. "The what?" "The pot of gold, or whatever it is," explained Styles. "Every self-respecting old country mansion has buried treasure somewhere." "Oh, that," replied Puller, his pipe going home at last. But Styles had seen a queer look in his honest eyes. "What did you think I meant?" "Nothing," answered Puller, but still not at ease. "I didn't quite hear." "Just the same, I wonder what he did think I meant," mused Styles, a half-hour later, as, from the piazza, he watched Puller stalking over the meadows. He wondered very keenly. What man would not? But the truth was that even the queer enigma of Baumgarten and the elusive suggestions which Puller had been unable to hide did not excite him very greatly. The eyes of a man who, like Andrew Styles, had watched for years all the high emotions of life grind past from the brutal detachment of a reporter's viewpoint, grow cynic and unbelieving. Mystery, romance, intrigue, and promise, such a man had seen them all rise up and wither, one after the other, resolving themselves, most of them into common sordidness, others into ridiculous travesty, until, by habit, he discounts every question at sight. So at this moment the only emotion by which Styles really found himself possessed was a sort of cynical shrewdness. He simply meant to take care. Just what were these fellows after? He wondered, to be sure, but his wonder was without illusion and iconoclastic. Time he knew to be the foe of all scheming. He had only to wait for the game to uncover itself. He wanted to get excited about it, to make it an adventure, but he knew with too much certainty what it must be. A few $1,000s more, or a few $1,000s less for a piece of ground that he did not want. Meantime, it was amusing to pull the strings over these men, one of whom he found himself beginning to like, and the other of whom he found for the most part revolting. He went to his luncheon smiling, but Mrs. Fields he discovered to be in anything but smiling mood. To answer the bell on her ironing day was bad enough, but to have to serve a luncheon at 1:30. Her air was not that of a martyr exactly, rather of silent scorn toward the whole human race. She watched Styles actually seated, then, leaving the room, came back with a long leather object which she placed at his plate. Her way of doing the thing was quite in accord with her mood, a certain straight-mouthed, wash-my-hands-of-the-whole-affair manner with which she put the thing on the tablecloth and then stepped back to watch the next move. The leather object was an old pocket-folder, but it did not belong to Styles, and he looked at it puzzled. What did she expect him to do with it? His relations with Mrs. Fields had not been on terms of the greatest trust, and he did not like to confess that it might be something that he had asked for and then forgotten. He searched his mind, but his recollection brought nothing about the worn, heavy case. It might be something that went with the house. Perhaps the master of the place was supposed by old tradition to sign it or inspect its contents on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. Possibly that was the way that the milkman sent in his bills. He learned that the butcher sent his in a little brown book with a picture of a fabulous ox. From the air with which she put it before him, it might be even his housekeeper's notice that she had resigned. There seemed to be nothing for it, except to be amateurish and open the thing. There was money inside, crisp new bills, and Styles pulled them out, but at first glance they appeared a little unnatural. He thought for a moment they must be counterfeit, but, once he had spread them before him, he understood why they looked strange. The top one was $1,000 note, and so were the others. There were 10 in all. Mrs. Fields must have been glad that she stayed. Styles took the money into his hand and looked up. "Does this happen often?" But Mrs. Fields was in no mood for persiflage. "I found it on the study floor." "Oh, Baumgarten." He ought to have guessed. With a sudden inspiration, Styles looked quickly in every compartment, but the slip which his visitor had held on his finger was not to be found. Anyway, Styles knew exactly the sum which Baumgartner had been prepared to waive in his face. But as an offer, or merely to bind the bargain? There was the question again. He looked up at Mrs. Fields. "Have you, by any chance, ever heard that there was oil on this property, or a gold mine, or anything?" Being a flippancy, he said it in a casual voice, and of course Mrs. Fields missed it all. A flippant remark repeated to a deaf person becomes a serious statement of fact or an insult, as the case may be, which Styles realized when he repeated this one in abridged and amended form. "I asked whether anyone had ever dug for oil on this place, or gold or anything." Shouted in that form by a gentleman with $10,000 in his hand, it did not sound at all as Styles had meant it, and Mrs. Fields forgot to be scornful. "Your uncle once said he wished someone would," she replied, but, unfortunately, Styles knew too much of his uncle by family tradition to be greatly fluttered by that. Styles's uncle had not been a huge success as a person. To Mrs. Fields, however, the matter was still a serious proposition. "I don't guess there's anyone around here who digs much for oil," she mused. To her mind, oil was apparently a native of any soil, like flag root. She bore this out with her next question. "Was you thinking of digging for oil?" "Not at least until I've been to the village and asked a few questions," Styles replied. Chapter 3. The village of Eden lay at a distance of about 2 miles from the old crater place. There was no hotel, but Baumgarten, if he were still in town, might be at a white house which sometimes took people. It had taken Styles himself on the night of his arrival, and before he had learned the existence or the talents of Mrs. Fields. The process of taking people, like all commerce in a country town, was made to appear entirely an accommodation to the person taken, and Styles had left under the impression that the bars would never be let down again. In Baumgarten's case, at least, they had not. The White House had never heard of him, and Styles wandered up the elm-shaded street, rather at a loss. Aside from his natural anxiety to relieve the other man's mind, no matter how much he disliked him personally, he had looked forward to an amusing moment when he handed the pocketbook over. There was Puller, of course. Puller might know his client's address. But then again, was it best that Puller should know all the steps of his dealings with the mysterious Baumgarten? Suddenly, he thought of Exberger. If for nothing else, it would be a good chance to find out just how well his late visitor really did know the famous man whose name he so glibly used. To reach Exberger himself, a letter would only have to be addressed to New York, but, as it happened, Styles actually did know where the offices of the International Amusement Syndicate were located. International, meaning one theater in Toronto. Thus, by the aid of brown paper from the butcher's shop, he walked into the express office, all prepared to toss over the counter a thin package addressed to Charles Exberger, Esquire, note to follow. The express agent, a youth of 18, shared the distaste of the White House for any new business. He managed to take the small parcel with a contempt which contained the warning that this must be positively the last offense. Grabbing a pad of forms and a carpenter's pencil, he made some illegible scrawls, as if to say that he meant to get the nasty business over with as quickly as possible. Apparently, as an afterthought, he held his pencil aloft. "Any value?" Styles had been waiting for this. $10,000, he replied. The youth dropped the package like an unclean thing. Holy smoke! He exclaimed. What is it? Radium? Styles made no reply, and the express youth did not insist. He was a broken man. I don't believe they'll let me take this, he said apologetically. He took down a canvas book the size of an atlas, printed in very small type. It was labeled Preliminary Instructions for Agents, and as he pored through the pages, Styles wondered what the agents would have to learn when they really got to the serious work of their profession. The youth shook his head. There ain't nothing about it in here. His whole manner had changed. He had taken Styles into the business as a partner, even looked to him for possible guidance. You might take it over the wire, suggested Styles. He would be back in an hour or so. Styles had, in fact, a way in which he was rather anxious to spend an hour in the village. His plans, indeed, rather hinged on this, for he had a shrewd suspicion that there was one man in Eden with whom a 10 minutes' talk would clear the mists from this whole ridiculous business. The man was Judge Tyler, a person who lurked in the back of his mind as a white-whiskered patriarch and his late uncle's best friend, for best friends of deceased old gentlemen are usually judges and usually have white whiskers. Inquiry directed him to a house which looked about as the old Crater place would have looked if someone had spared it a coat of paint from time to time. With its cupola, its spotless white walls, and its 2 Noah's Ark little spruce trees out front, this was a rural aristocracy caught at the source. But as an uncle's best friend, the judge, beyond the fact that he really did have white whiskers, was not a success. Like everyone else in the town with whom he had tried to do business, the judge gave Styles, on first appearance, the benefit of no doubts. Styles was there to steal and pillage, it could be seen at a glance. Judge Tyler, moreover, improved on acquaintance as little as did his house. The latter, on the outside, was impressive in its suggestions of huge log fires and colonial grandeur. On the inside, so much of it as Styles was permitted to see, smelled of cabbage, while the decorations ran heavily to calendars sent out by the insurance companies and lumber firms. The judge himself, in a pin-check suit, with a red face and pure white whiskers, looked like a rare old boy whose eyes would light up when you mentioned Star Pointer or Salvatore, who chuckled over Boswell's life in spare moments and had personal recollections of Henry Clay. In practice, the moment he opened his mouth, he disclosed himself as a nasal old rustic who seemed to know very little and was grimly determined not to know more. He was not even really a judge, just a justice of the peace, an office which the liveryman had also held and which Fuller himself held now. Judge, said Styles, nevertheless determined on perfect frankness, why does a Jewish gentleman named Baumgarten, clothing type, wave money before me and cry aloud for my place? Why do Jewish gentlemen want places in Eden, anyway? I mean this Eden. How? Said the judge, tartly. At the moment they were sitting in the room which contained the judge's desk, a room with linoleum on the floor, no rare old furniture, no steel engravings of Daniel Webster, neither office nor study, neither library nor den would have fitted that room. A dentist might have seen possibilities in it. The judge, however, was doing the only thing which he had yet done which was really in character. He was toying with a celluloid paper knife. Old gentlemen about to advise the nephews of deceased best friends should, if possible, toy with paper knives, and Styles plucked up hope. He repeated his question. How? Said the judge. All toying ceased at once. Styles saw the sort of judge he had to deal with. A man named Baumgarten wants to buy my place, he said abruptly. What for? Snarled the judge. To say that he did not know was just the reason of Styles's present visit. He had, in fact, come to pour out his heart to the best friend of his deceased uncle, and, if the action seemed to call for it, to weep on his bosom. But he had found his heart chilled from the moment that he had smelled the cabbage in the front hall. If there had only been a hint of fine cigars, a chance reference to John C. Calhoun, even the tiniest portrait of Daniel Webster, he might have told all that he knew, or all that he did not know. Instead, "What for?" snapped the judge. "I imagine he has reasons," replied Styles. "Well, are you going to sell?" asked the judge. "That depends entirely," replied Styles. "It depends on what?" "What a sale usually depends on." Styles said it with a sort of arch and hopeful shrewdness, but even this was over the judge's head, and that a fine old head, too. "A sale," explained Styles resignedly, "usually depends on the price and the offer, doesn't it?" "Humph," said the judge. There seemed to be no possible reason for prolonging this interview, but Styles still sat there, and the judge began to toy with the paper cutter again. Styles became almost hopeful once more. Perhaps the long overdue "My boy, your uncle and I were friends" was coming at last. Instead, the judge said suddenly, "Young man, you won't get much for that place." So, thought Styles, you want to buy it too. "It's taxed for $4,000, and it ain't worth a cent more." "It was listed in the estate for $7,000, said Styles sweetly. He had a sudden vague recollection that the judge had been one of the executors or something. Puller had been the one with whom he had talked. "Didn't you help to appraise it?" he added. The judge looked away. "That's the custom, to double the tax value." "I suppose you wouldn't give 7 yourself?" said Styles, almost wistfully. "What do I want of more land?" asked the judge. "Well, of course," suggested Styles, meaningly, "it's just the land itself." The judge looked at him sharply, and he explained innocently, "There's the house." "The old rat trap," said the judge. Styles rose to his feet suddenly. "Well, Judge," he said, genially, "I just dropped in to say good morning, anyway. I understood that you and my uncle were pretty good friends." "Sit down," said the judge, but his face did soften a little. "Oh, I won't take any more of your time," insisted Styles, airily, and was well on his way to the door when the judge recalled him. "Just a minute, young man." Styles turned. "Don't you sell that place until you see me about it." Styles could not resist the temptation. "Do I understand that you want an option on it?" The effect on the judge was galvanic. Mentally speaking, he put his hand over his pocketbook with a frightened air. "Me? No, but you better see me." "Judge, you're awfully good," replied Styles, "but I wouldn't think of putting you to any trouble. This Baumgarten seems like a very decent fellow. He's a great friend of Exberger, the well-known theatrical man." The paper knife dropped with a crash. "Who did you say?" asked the judge. "Charles Exberger, the well-known theatrical man." The judge sat and stared, his face growing redder than ever. "That fellow!" he almost shouted. Then he rose to his feet and came nearer to Styles. "Young man," he said, "take my advice, and you'll leave that Exberger strictly alone." Good heavens, thought Styles, what in the world has Exberger got to do with this little hole in the woods? What's the matter with him? He asked boldly. The judge's reply seemed irrelevant, but it might be highly relevant, as coming from the judge. "You come to me when you want to sell," he commanded, gruffly. "Thanks," replied Styles, and with this he escaped. Not a word about, "My lad, while you are here your home is with us." Not even a hint of country roast and apple dumplings. Styles went back with relief to the comparative geniality of the express office, where he was greeted fraternally, although a bit reverently, by the youth in the office. "They won't let me take it," announced the latter, a disappointed voice clear across the dirty room. "There's no pouch goes over this line, and they won't let me handle it. They wanted to know what it was." with the authority of the whole express company behind him. The boy guilelessly expected to have his personal curiosity satisfied, but Styles saw no reason for this. "If they won't take it, what difference does it make to them what is in it? You didn't give them my name, did you?" The boy's face fell. He tried to lie, but couldn't quite make it. "They had to know," he confessed. "They did they?" said Styles darkly, but, to the boy's disappointment, he went out without another word. Leaving his melodrama aside, however, it struck Styles, as he walked up the dusty road from the station, that $10,000 belonging to Baumgarten or anybody else was not the safest thing to have in a country house half a mile from the nearest neighbor. Unless he wished to take Puller into his confidence, he must keep the money one night at least, but he meant to relieve his mind as soon as possible. At the post office he got a sheet of paper and wrote a letter to Exberger, the first letter in history, he mused, that a theatrical producer would have ever received from a newspaper man who did not have a play that he wished produced. Charles Exberger, Esquire, International Amusement Syndicate, New York City. Dear Sir, a gentleman named Baumgarten, who says that he is a friend of yours, called at my house yesterday and unfortunately dropped a pocketbook containing a very large sum of money. As I had not previously known Mr. Baumgarten, and as he has not returned, would you kindly give me his address, or notify him where the money is to be found? Yours very truly, Andrew Styles. In a day or two, having had experience with the managerial manner, Styles foresaw that he would get an answer signed by some underling named Sam or something, or Al something, or Abe something. He had often wondered why an assistant to a theatrical manager never had a complete first name, unless it was something pithy like Max or Leo. But, pending an answer to this grave problem, and also to his note, he went to the hardware store and purchased the largest revolver in the showcase. Chapter 4. "Mrs. Fields," shouted Styles as he reached his house, "do I look like a burglar?" His reception at the hands of Judge Tyler, and not his revolver, was on his mind, but during the past few days he had found a tepid amusement in shooting unexpected and unrelated questions like this at his housekeeper. The truth was that he had not yet made up his mind whether he had to deal with a genuine humorist or a half-wit. His housekeeper's answer left him still in doubt. "I've never seen any burglars," she said. The subject left her completely cold, and she turned to something important. "Young Puller has been here again." "Puller?" asked Styles. "Did he say what he wanted?" But Mrs. Fields, having done her part, had turned her back and was gone. She did not hear him, or she did not want to. Either was likely. The cause of the visit, however, must have been of more importance to Puller than it was to her, for about an hour after Styles had finished his dinner, the lights of his car made a Ben Greet effect on the shrubbery outside the windows, and Puller himself came stomping up on the piazza. He came in without knocking, and Styles motioned a chair, but Puller stood there, irresolute, his cap in his hand, his hair rather tousled. Puller had on a dinner jacket now, his shirt front showing under a big fawn polo coat. He stood, blinking his eyes at the lamp, but something seemed very much on his mind. "Styles," he burst out, "did you find a pocketbook here today?" For answer, Styles took the package from his pocket and undid the wrappings. In his relief, Puller actually collapsed, almost collapsed, and he actually did sink into a chair. "Thank heavens!" he exclaimed. "You can guess how that makes me feel." He took the leather case, and Styles noticed that he put it in his pocket without any motion to count the money. "A very poor businessman," was his mental comment, "but a very fine gentleman." Styles himself crushed the wrapping paper into a ball and shied it in the general direction of the fireplace. "I thought it was Baumgarten's," he explained. "I was sending it back to him." No answer came, and, looking around, Styles saw that Puller was getting redder and redder. "It is Baumgarten's," he said. "Or rather, it was." "What was?" thought Styles, but he added, aloud, "I ought to tell you. I saw what was in it. How much it was," he corrected, a second later. The confession did not affect Puller in the least. He seemed hardly to care. "Why, of course," he agreed absently. "What else could you do?" In spite of his lucky revolver, of his lucky recovery, Puller seemed almost as ill at ease as before, and Styles found himself forcing the conversation. "I was out on a search for your friend when you called. Is it too much to ask whether Baumgarten knows that this was lost?" Puller shook his head without looking up. "A check for the whole amount went to him this morning." Styles whistled. "This morning? I thought—" At last Puller looked up. He was very boyish, yet very likable in his confusion. "I wasn't acting for Baumgarten. Then. I told him I would at first, and then he left with me. He wanted to clinch it at once. Then I talked with certain parties, and I thought it best not to act for him." He paused, uncomfortable, but he seemed to be getting at what he really had on his mind. Styles let him take his time, but studied the young man sharply, while Puller himself looked down at the floor. A queer combination, this Puller. Quite a lot of the Milford, and yet, here and there, a strange bit of the yokel. His rough hands, for instance, and his way of flushing whenever he had to say anything important. Styles wondered whether there were men like that in all country towns. He gathered not. It was not his idea of the rural type. Still, Puller seemed struggling to talk, but diffident about getting at it, and Styles burst off on another line. People always had interested him more than things. "What in the world do you people do with yourselves up here? The evening clothes and all that. Not but what I like it." Puller came out of his abstraction to smile. "We do that," he said. "In the country you can be quite a gentleman on nothing at all." Styles raised his eyebrows in surprise. Not very much of the yokel about this young man, except always his hands, and those might be largely fishing and grease from the engine. Puller, however, was not to be diverted from the idea which he was attempting to express, no matter how much it made him struggle. "Look here, Styles," he broke out at last. "If you want to do this thing without Baumgarten, you can. There's quite a little money round the countryside, places where you'd never guess it. I'm not good for much myself, just a little, but the people know me." Styles was caught by surprise. What thing? He was just as much in the dark as he had been before, but by quick control he managed to look judicious and masterful. Puller was not as difficult to deceive as Baumgarten, and for that reason Styles was not so anxious to deceive him. Still, until he knew what he was really talking about, he thought it best to look as if he knew everything. Thus he sat quietly looking ahead and drawing on his cigar sagely. And it was Baumgarten's cigar, too. Puller carried his pipe and auxiliary engines in his dinner jacket, just as he did in his tweeds. He got them all out, one by one. "Wait a minute," he said. "I left my motor running." When he came back, he took off the polo coat and puffed out his rank tobacco. Styles found a man in a dinner jacket smoking tobacco that smelled like a navvy's, rather horsey and quite Pickwickian. He wasn't so sure that he didn't want to live in the country after all. "Of course," said Puller, "we couldn't pay the earth." "No, I imagine not," replied Styles. What under heaven was all this nonsense about, anyway? but he still appeared judicious and masterful and gazed straight ahead. "I suppose," began Puller again, "that you wouldn't want to set a figure. I mean absolutely in confidence." Styles puffed again and then looked at Puller with a dry smile. "My dear fellow," he said, "under the circumstances, isn't that asking a good deal?" Puller flushed. "Of course I didn't mean," he burst out apologetically. "Oh, not at all, not at all," Styles calmed him. He was talking purely at random, but he thought of something more that might sound well in that place, and added, "Of course, you can see how I'm placed. You can hardly blame me." "Hardly," agreed Puller. He shook his head. "It's a funny business, isn't it?" "Some aspects of it are," replied Styles sagely. He lit another cigar. It was one of his own, and he had to admit that Baumgarten's were better. Suddenly he said, "I took the precaution of buying a gun today." Puller looked up with almost a start. Styles could not help noting how oddly his expression was that of Baumgarten in the afternoon. Then, just as Baumgarten himself had done, he made an attempt to pass it off lightly. "Oh, yes," he said, recollecting, "because of the money." "Of course," replied Styles, but what else was the thought that leapt to his mind. Would somebody please say one sane word about what all these starts and suggestions could mean? He thought of the judge and his sudden anger, and resolved to try the same lead on Puller. "By the way, Puller, what do you know about Charles Exberger?" It was an utter chance shot, but Puller again took the pipe from his teeth and looked at him open-mouthed. "You don't mean to say that Exberger has been here already?" Styles smiled. "No, I didn't say that he had. I just asked you what you knew about him. He and I are having a little correspondence." Puller's answer was perfectly honest. "I don't know as much as I'd like to." "Neither do I," Styles would have liked to reply, but he could not allow himself any luxuries in this conversation, and he said nothing, just continued to look masterful, the busiest man over the director's table. Having discovered that all he had to do, apparently, was to shoot out an amazing sentence that came into his head, Styles was eager to play this game indefinitely, but Puller got up hurriedly. The honest fellow was ridiculously like a little boy who had discovered something and can't wait to tell it to somebody. That was the yokel in him. But tell it to whom, Styles wondered, after he had gone. Styles felt, indeed, when Puller's car had thrown its white lights on his shrubbery and then had swerved its long beam down the main road, that he had done a hard day's work. He let himself back into his chair with a sense of manual labor behind him, instead of a series of talks in which he had felt like a masquerader. Styles had laughed at Baumgarten, and had laughed at the judge. He had laughed at Puller, and had laughed at himself. But he ceased to laugh as he sat in his chair, with no one but himself to guess at his thoughts, and tried to make head or tail of the whole affair. The very fact that everyone was so mysterious made it too good to be true. They were all too melodramatic, too childish. If they had laughed and joked and patted him on the back and pretended that they did not want anything, he would have been on his guard. He would have suspected that they were really up to some mischief. But this starting and staring! Oh, great heavens, he thought. Someone will come in next and begin to babble about the missing papers. That wasn't such a bad idea in itself. He would look for old papers, and, if he didn't find any, one could always write them oneself. They would make proper furniture for such a house as this. A rude diagram and a compass, and a halfway between the old tree and the big rock the gold is buried. Then, as usual, his natural cynicism drowned his own whims. Great Scott! If a man got as maudlin as this after living 3 weeks in the country, What would he become in 3 years? No wonder Fuller blushed and stammered every time he tried to talk. He stood up to turn down the lamp, but as he rose from his chair, he heard a thud, and, looking down, saw his new pistol lying on the floor, where it had slipped from his hip pocket. He picked it up and held it musingly. Yes, he agreed with himself, there is no doubt about it. The next act in this farce is certainly to hear soft footsteps at night and find that my desk has been rifled. Rifled, I am sure, is the word. And, as a matter of fact, that is just what he did hear. Soft footsteps at night. Preposterous, as he realized, but it seemed to be so. And I think that's a good place to stop. No, late enough. I really shouldn't push through another 15 pages. Must say, it's got off to an interesting start. Quite a bit of what's going on, and well, we don't have any more idea than the protagonist. How long is this book? Okay, almost, or 325 pages. So it'll take a few screams to get through. The reader is a bit like a dungeon master, I suppose. And hey, Asmodon, thanks for coming in to lurk. And Julian, my day was okay. I hope yours was too. If your traps are still around. Oh, and you guys, please go check out Asmodon. No, I think it's pretty interesting thus far. Sorry, Yak. Oh, Yahweh says die. Sorry. Welcome in. How are you doing tonight? Yeah, it's hard to get a real sense of most of the characters so far, and including Styles itself, but you can see they're laying the groundwork for this mystery and trying to keep us in suspense as long as possible. I mean, it can't simply be that there's a gold mine on the property. I mean, yeah, considering the title is CRATER'S GOLD, it's got to be something more complex. Yeah. I mean, a critical analysis, I don't know, it's hard to say. It doesn't seem like it's the most complex mystery yet, and yeah, it's there's a lot of it's just about, you know, the setting and trying to make us feel as disoriented as the protagonist does, but I suppose there's several fun characters in there. Actually, they're all pretty fun. I feel like some of the good mysteries from the teens and 20s tried to at least have entertaining characters, even if they weren't always really complex, like in an Agatha Christie book. Not that I've, made a huge study of novels of the teens and 20s. I really haven't read that many. And, what's it called? Circular Staircase was aught, so that doesn't count. I'm trying to remember when the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries were written. I read a couple of those. Yeah. Off to an interesting start. And I suppose, I don't know when we'll continue it. Probably not next week, because Monday is a bit of a holiday, and I won't be streaming on that day, but who knows who else might be streaming, you know. We do have precedents of other entities taking over streams around these parts. No, no Hercule Poirot, and not really much of an analytical detective so far. Just these more sort of like stumbling into things and fumbling his way through it by being non-committal. Oh, I appreciate that, Captain Thaco, yeah. A nice, yeah, light mystery story before bedtime. But maybe I'll continue it in 2 weeks. I don't know if I do 40 pages a night, that'll carry us through, what, seven streams or so. Maybe another night I'll try and do more and push for 50, but part of it is how the chapters land. Break down, like, remember when I did Benighted in particular, some of the chapters were a great deal longer than others. Well, I reckon I should find somebody to raid, and then finish dinner, and then do a couple of other things I probably should do tonight. Or not. All before midnight, of course. It's only like an hour away. But as for what's coming up on stream, on Wednesday, we'll be continuing Doom 3, Resurrection of Evil expansion pack. On Saturday, we'll be continuing the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc 2021. And, we might only have a couple streams of that left, I think. We've been through a good number of games. Then Sunday, we'll continue Carol Reed, Hope Springs Eternal, point-and-click mystery. And probably nothing whatsoever will be happening on Monday, but I can't be held responsible personally if something does. I assume. I don't know how laws work. I didn't go to law school. Maybe I should have. No, I shouldn't have. Let's find somebody to raid. Let's see. She's offline. Some cool people on. Not likely I'm going to find anybody else who's reading books, at least not anybody I know. There's a books category on stream, but I don't know if this is what it's for. I don't know. Maybe I should raid somebody I know. I think who's raided us recently and whom we haven't gotten a chance to raid. Sea of Stars. Now let's raid. Yeah, let's just raid Haggard Hessian, our friend, who is currently doing Tomb Raider Underworld, which I believe is one of the 2000s era Tomb Raider games. Good heavens, there's been a lot of Tomb Raider games. I wonder if he's playing the whole series. These days I'll get rid of this congestion forever. Haggis. Oh, that's what you call Haggard Hessian. was like, I'm sorry, why are we discussing the inside of a sheep's stomach? Did I miss something? Yeah, she's got to run out of tombs at some point. Looks like somebody's raided her last tomb. Oh, I really must stop quoting racist 90s FPSs. But what can I say? I like the build engine. But thank you everybody for coming to hang out tonight. And I appreciate everybody listening to me read obscure books. I appreciate all the chatters, and I appreciate all the lurkers. And you guys can find my VODs up on YouTube. And you can find me on Twitter and MySpace, where I post stream announcements and forget to post them on MySpace sometimes, like tonight, and don't post that much else. Silly joke sometimes. But I hope everybody has a good night. Yeah, don't take any Cuban cigars from shady people. Say hi to Haggard Hessian, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday for Doom 3.